Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell and we're bored of it, and today we're going to be covering Nexus, a 1 to 2 player fast-paced card game that's currently live on GameFound. We're going to give you a brief overview of Nexus and then touch upon each faction that we were sent, kind of how they work and how they play.
And this is because each faction is asymmetric, although the core rules are very simple. But even more interesting than that is that the way you build a deck for Nexus is by combining two factions together. So we're going to cover each faction and what they do. And just so you know, there are 2 boxes available for Nexus on this campaign, and the factions are kind of split amongst those boxes, and you can see that on the campaign. Now, very important to know that this is a sponsored preview of Nexus, i.e. we have received money to make this. And the main reason that is because they wanted it out during the campaign, which makes sense, but that meant we had to dig into our holiday time. So that is the main reason. We have not been told what to say at all. All of our opinions at the end are our own, but of course, that's up for you to decide with the information we've just given you. But now on to Nexus. The game is going to start by players randomly dealing out 4 faction cards. From these faction cards, players will enter a snake draft to draft 2 factions each. And then, based on the factions they have drafted, they're going to combine the decks of those factions and shuffle them so that they have one deck comprising of cards from both factions.
On their turn, players will draw 1 card and play a single card. Before or after playing a card, players can activate cards in their tableau that have an exhaust effect. Importantly, some cards have a chain effect, which allow you to play a second card, or even more if that second card also has a chain effect. And some cards can be played for free, which doesn't count as playing a card. After that, you move to the attack phase. The goal of the game is to reduce your opponent's Nexus from 30 points to 0 by attacking, and the units you play into your tableau can have either attack, defense, or support values. Ideally, you want to attack the Nexus by using attack units to do that much damage, but if your opponent has defense units, then you have to attack those first. If there are no defense units, then you may choose to attack support units, and you might want to do this because they're typically doing something very annoying to you and something positive for your opponent. An attack unit cannot attack another attack unit. Doing greater or equal damage to the unit's value will remove it from play, and all attack units get removed from play once they've been used to attack. Whoever reduces their opponent's Nexus to 0 first will win.
Let's begin with the Pirates, which is a personal favorite faction of mine. They are all about capturing your opponent's cards. So a lot of their cards are going to say things like, look at the top 3 or 5 cards of your opponent's deck, and then you get to both take one of them as a captive, which means they are out of the game permanently for your opponent, and you can rearrange the cards you've looked at, basically weakening their card draw for the next few turns, or putting it in an optimal order for you. And I really like this for both reasons, that you're weakening their deck, and also you're kind of messing with what they're going to draw. But a lot of the cards will also kind of key off having captives. So you might do damage based on how many captives you have, or you might get effects that trigger if you have a certain number of captives. Let's move on to another one of my favorite factions, the Assassins, which are based on assassin cards. These are cards that you can put into your opponent's deck, and when your opponent draws them, they take damage directly to their Nexus. So a lot of this faction is about getting these cards somewhere in your opponent's deck, whether that be on the bottom, the top, or shuffling your opponent's deck so the ones on the bottom can be drawn, or even moving cards from the bottom to the top. It's quite fun because it adds a lot of tension every time your opponent draws a card, particularly if you've managed to get all your assassins into their deck, meaning that you're both waiting to see what happens.
Dragons are heavy hitters. They have a lot of attack damage in their deck, but what's interesting is they work around having other dragons in play. So it creates this really nice puzzle of figuring out when to attack and when to hold back so that you can trigger these abilities since any attacking units are removed from play.
The wizards have a really solid damage output. their game is all about casting spells, which are powerful and often will even allow you to split damage how it is you like to split it. Some will deal incredible amounts of damage. Now, the other side of this faction is the fact that they're very good at chaining, with a lot of cards in this deck allowing you to deal damage, but also to chain cards, meaning that in the right position, you can have some very powerful turns. The Vikings are, as you may expect, very good at offense. They are based around their rage tokens, which are tokens that can be gained and then spent to do extra damage when attacking. However, on top of that, they can also be gained by playing Viking cards, or having them in play can trigger a number of effects, such as being able to play cards for free or triggering bonus damage based upon how many you have in play. So managing your rage economy is going to be very important with this faction.
On the opposite end of how to go about attacking someone, we have the Samurai. Their mechanism is focused on discarding cards. Samurai cards will often allow you to discard cards for an effect, and they often have effects that are triggered when they are discarded. They're also slippery in combat because either they don't leave play once they've attacked, or they do, but they're allowed to return to their owner's deck rather than going into the discard pile. The Dryads focus on healing. They don't do too much damage, but nearly every card in this deck lets you heal damage from your Nexus or your units. Very much a support faction. They also let you draw cards regularly, so you have more options than your opponent.
Next up, the Celestials, and these are an interesting faction because they're all about sacrificing their own units. So they work with the key terms Purify and Purified. Purify is an effect that, when activated, it lets you discard the top card of your deck into your discard pile. Now, if it is a Celestial card, pretty much the majority of Celestial cards will also have the keyword Purified. And if they are purified, e.g. discarded by Purify action, they will have an effect that will trigger. So it might be put that unit into play, it might be draw that card, it might be XYZ. But it's quite interesting because you're trying to get rid of cards from their deck to trigger the effects they have. So it's quite unique in the way it works compared to some of the other factions, in that you almost are using less of those cards to get better effects.
The Siege Masters are a very direct faction. They have no attacking units, and instead they're based almost entirely on using when played effects in order to deal damage. As makes sense thematically, they can also deal damage directly to the Nexus, bypassing any defenders. Some cards also let you re-trigger the when played effects of cards that are already played to your tableau.
Finally, we have the Vampires, who are a very tricky and risky faction. They can deal a lot of damage, but you have to self-sacrifice to make that damage because you'll also have to damage your own Nexus. However, they do provide opportunities to heal, so you will have to walk a fine line, but you won't be, if you play right, going too far into the red. Final thoughts. We have genuinely enjoyed Nexus, I think, to a surprising amount. There's obviously a lot of variety within the different decks, and the way that you kind of combine them together and have a deck of two means that every game's going to be quite different. And I think particularly what we've enjoyed is how each deck plays differently and has a kind of different gimmick, if you will. But they're very simple to get to grips with and understand. It's in some ways a very simple game, yet you have a lot of fun playing around with these different mechanisms within this kind of very streamlined rule set.
Yeah, I agree. I can be a little bit hit and miss on games like this, these two-player card
Very much so.
Card battle games. But I really, really enjoyed this one. And like you said, I think it is because I think the powers within the deck are so distinct.
Yeah.
So it feels fun to try and explore how you can combine them as well. And it just didn't feel as frustrating as I feel like a lot of games in this genre are. It was more on the fun side. It doesn't outstay its welcome too long. Maybe that's part of it as well.
Very good playtime.
Yeah, exactly. I find sometimes games like this can go on a little bit long, and then it's so frustrating going back and forth, but it just, can go on too long. But this is really good playtime. I felt that yeah, the decks are like very, very well balanced. You just got to kind of lean into what
I
your
agree.
decks
I would
are
have
doing.
said that.
Whereas, again, other games I've played like this have felt maybe a little bit imbalanced, and it kind of depending on what cards you pull out. Whereas here I felt it was just very balanced. You always had options, basically.
Yeah.
So it didn't have that kind of frustrating factor. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I was going to.
Yeah, really enjoyed it. Would definitely recommend it if it sounds of interest to you. I think not that I'd say it's a negative because it didn't negatively impact gameplay, but do you find, as I found, that the decks don't necessarily synergize so much when you combine them together?
No, that's true. No, I didn't find myself.
I think
making
some
connections
really
so
would
much.
synergize well together.
Yeah.
But I think for the most part, it's just like you kind of have a mix of cards.
Yeah, I agree. I was more synergizing with like
Exactly,
cards, and because you there's ways of getting more cards in your hand, right? So
Yeah.
you have always got that option to be. Probably don't think they synergize together, like you say, but. Yeah, I didn't even think of that, so it's
No, it's just something.
not an issue
I
for
didn't have
us.
an issue with it. It's just something I thought of that
Yeah.
maybe if people are kind of expecting these like epic combinations to go together, I think you're still, even though you have two decks combined, you're still leaning into the kind of powers of one deck and the
Yes.
powers of the other deck,
Agree.
rather
Right.
than trying to get them together.
Spin them off each other, yeah.
But that is Nexus. We hope this was informative to you, and thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.